Coming up on That Was a Show. She's a marriage counselor going through a divorce. He's a divorce attorney who can't settle down. They're sharing an office, but can they share a heart? Join Brynn, Aaron, and Barry as they schedule an appointment and try to get some good advice.
We grew up during peak sitcom, Seinfeld, Friends, The Fresh Prince. But those shows were diamonds in the rough. This podcast is not about those diamonds. It's about the rough. Some sitcoms were briefly popular in their time. Some were canceled almost immediately. You probably won't recognize most of these, and you'll ask, that was a show?
That was a show?
The podcast about failed or forgotten sitcoms from the 80s and 90s, starring
Brynn Byrne,
Aaron Yeger,
and Andrew Helmer as Barry.
a Radio Gizmo production.
How's everyone doing today?
You know, it's the first snow of the year, and it's interesting to see. I'm enjoying it mostly because I'm just looking at it.
Yes.
And I haven't been outside. Oh, no, that's a lie. I went outside. I was just pretending like I hadn't been outside so I could seem like I still loved the weather. I was out earlier, and it was pretty annoying.
But it was fluffy. It wasn't all slushy and stupid yet. It's very early to be having a snow like this.
To be honest, it's probably going to be gone by tomorrow.
This snow is probably as short-lived as some of the sitcoms that we cover here.
Yes,
All right.
except we can't blame climate change on the cancellation of most of these.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most, but not all, but most. Are you guys ready to talk about yet another show called Everything's Relative? Just kidding. Just kidding.
No.
Let's get this started.
Let's get this show on the road.
Yeah.
Or in a very contained office, as it were.
So yeah, we're watching Good Advice this week. It's interesting in that I know I've pulled this card before, but you know, if I had to pick a reason of why I chose this show, it was definitely like just an aimless scrolling down of like, what got canceled? What's on the CTV Go app? Oh, there we go. So, but then, you see familiar people on the art. So I was like, hey, Shelley Long, Treat Williams. All right. Is it Treat or Tret? I don't know.
It's Treat.
Okay. He is a treat.
He is a treat. Yeah, I agree with that.
I was really hoping neither of you would say that.
Yeah.
It's just been so long since I've seen Treat Williams in anything that I guess I had kind of forgotten that like he's a very enjoyable presence whenever he's around. Like, so that was a nice little surprise.
It was. Now, I don't want to detour too far from us like actually describing for the audience what this show actually is, but I do just want to say I recognized him right away. I dug into his IMDb profile. He's got like 131 credits. He's a legend, but as far as I can tell, this is his only sitcom.
Yeah. He is the king. I'll get into it later on the spinoff, but this is not his genre.
Yeah, he's a dramatic actor for sure.
But he did well in it.
Yeah.
He was quite a natural in this type of role.
Yeah, it's sort of like Kevin Conroy a few weeks ago, where you're just sort of like he's better than Conroy in this, but like it just, you go, this guy could have had a different angle to his career. Yeah. Like there's so much energy in his delivery that like I was just like, it was a surprise. Okay. So before we go too far, I'll describe. So the show we watched was Good Advice. It was a 1992 Shelley Long vehicle. Fresh off the finale of Cheers, Hollywood was gunning for more Shelley Long. So the project has her starring as a therapist, currently going through a divorce, and she's trying to adjust to the big life changes that come along with it. She's paired with a rascal of a divorce attorney she shares an office with, which is Treat Williams. He's a womanizer, of course. He's set in his ways. She's a hopeless romantic going through a hard time. It's, right from like the first time they interact, I was like, oh, I feel a will they, won't they coming on.
Yeah.
Rounding out the cast was Light-Filled Lewis as office errand boy Sean, George Weiner as the office owner and chiropractor Artie, and the immortal Estelle Harris as an office receptionist and Artie's mother, Ronnie. The show's first season only managed 6 episodes, but they did bring it back for a slightly longer second season, which they mostly burned off in the summer the next year. Season 2, Estelle Harris had moved on, seemingly because of her increased screen time on Seinfeld. We watched 2 episodes. Oddly enough, the second episode and the 4th episode, skipping the pilot because it was not on the CTV Go app.
So, Barry, why don't you go ahead and tell us what happens in the first episode that we watched?
So the first episode we watched, which was episode 2, was called Jack of Hearts. So the one thing I didn't touch on in my introduction is that kind of the thrust of this series beyond the will they, won't they, is this is a professional office building, and there are 3 professionals sharing this space. There is a chiropractor, there is Shelley Long's therapist, and there's Treat Williams' divorce attorney. And, you know, most of the shenanigans of the show are mostly just about the interplay between the 3 of them in this office, along with Estelle Harris as the receptionist. So this episode introduces Estelle Harris, so I'm glad we actually did get to see it. So in this episode, we pick up in the shared office space. Susan, Jack, and Artie are arguing over their lack of a receptionist. Artie quickly, gets past that, saying that he's hired his mother to take over as the receptionist. Then, Estelle Harris is introduced. She's amazing. We moved past that pretty quickly.
I did squeal with delight as soon as I saw her come out of the elevator.
Did you know she was in this?
So I saw in our back and forth messages a mention of her, but when I put it on for whatever reason, I wasn't expecting her. And Aaron heard me from the other room as I watched, and I was like, I was so excited to see her.
I knew she was in the show, but I didn't know what role or how big of a role. So I was delighted to see that we were going to get to see a satisfying amount of Estelle Harris in the episodes that we watched.
Yeah, like everything, there's never enough Estelle Harris, but there's still a good chunk.
Yes.
So the episode, it's kind of it gets into like the main conceit of the show, which is mostly the back and forth between Shelley Long and Treat Williams. They bicker over life, love, their professional lives. In this episode, Jack is upset because Susan is constantly stealing his clients, trying to save their marriage while he's trying to,
get
profit.
them divorced.
Yeah, he's trying to profit on the divorce. This, of course, comes to a head with a fairly obvious plot where she steals another supposed client, talks her into ending her marriage and following her heart to go with the other man she's with. And of course, the other man in this case, unbeknownst, is Jack. He has no intentions of making things serious with this woman. Whoa.
Yeah.
And, we get to, this is a plot that, you see it coming a mile away, and it's, it's still satisfying. It's a classic, right? I don't know why, but they always do this thing with characters named Jack, where they always give like random characters, call them John, because Jack and John, it is a short for it.
Yeah.
But so the way they hide that he's the other man is she only refers to him as John the whole time when she's talking about him. And then he comes out and he's like, "What are you doing here?" And then she instantly only calls him Jack for the rest of the episode.
I know. It makes no sense. It's very silly. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Okay, so I actually find the premise in terms of a workplace comedy where it's 3 different professionals sharing a professional office and sharing a receptionist pretty charming. And
the only thing I'll say though, sorry to jump in like this, but it feels a little contrived because normally when people are sharing a space like that, it's all medical professionals or all different types of lawyers or all, it just seemed a little weird.
I agree, and that's a bit of sitcom logic.
Yeah, it's sitcom logic for sure.
Having multiple professionals sharing an office space, I don't mind that. I think that's kind of charming. And the plot of that episode, that dynamic between her taking his clients is expected, but not too bad. It feels like this type of show feels like the adult contemporary easy listening music of which was very popular at the time. This is like it's like the music that you would expect would be playing in their office lobby, like a Kenny G type of thing. That's what this kind of plot is. It's just kind of comfortable.
I find it funny that like he's the show makes a big thing out of him being a divorce attorney, and he's, a womanizer and stuff. So obviously he's profiting off of these things, but he's the one being professional in this situation. Like Shelley Long's behavior in these episodes, like they would yank her license away.
Oh my God. There's so many scenarios where her license should be revoked or she breaches some serious ethics.
She is a bad therapist.
Yes, it's horrifying.
There's also this running gag that the show seems to do where each episode opens on a session where she's giving therapy to some patient, where it's not going to be really part of the plot. It's just like a little throwaway scene, and it seems to be like a running thing that they're going to do. And immediately you can tell she's not a good therapist.
No.
Yeah, actually, I guess to the show's credit, they never say she is.
Right.
This isn't the normal thing where like she's the best in the biz. Like, no, she is, maybe the worst in the biz.
Yeah, it seems like she's one of these like sort of pseudo celebrity therapists because she has like a book out. Like she seems like kind of like a public figure type. And because she's kind of like a pretty blonde lady, like she's the one who's probably on TV occasionally and stuff. And
interesting you should say that. In the pilot, it comes up she had just done a run on Oprah. So
okay.
Yeah, so she's a telegenic sort of like celebrity pseudo type. And I wish they would blatantly make more of a thing of it, that she's not a good therapist and that she's kind of
that would have been fun if they actually made that the thing. That's the shtick.
I feel like they make a lot of her clients, like especially in those like opening little sequences, they're like the butt of the joke, and that's problematic. Like that doesn't hold up today, where it's like obviously anyone going to therapy is completely, like that's how they're portraying people going to therapy. They're all going to be.
The cold opens are way too cute by like a million degrees. Like, so in the two that we watched, the one cold open is it basically it's just like an old like some a therapist walks into a bar joke essentially where it's like a guy is in therapy because he's in love with his prostitute. And then she happens to be right next to him, and then of course she goes, well, my hour's up, and Shelley Long says, well, I'll be the judge of that. And she's like, no, my hour's up. I charge by the hour too. And, and Shelley Long's like, boy, I don't charge that much.
Yeah. It's very
That was
silly.
a joke that I can picture someone writing that. I can picture someone thinking, oh, this is so clever. The idea that the sex worker who's sitting next to him charges by the hour, but the therapist charges by the hour. You can picture them writing that and not really understanding that when you actually play it out, it's not going to be good. I can see, though, on paper how they thought, oh, this is so clever.
It's a real, like, a prostitute and a therapist walk into a bar.
Yes.
Like, it's,
Yeah.
For sure.
It's a real take my wife, please joke, Like,
that's very silly, like,
And the other cold open is her talking, really intense close-ups with her client. And she's saying, like, you have to let go. You just have to let go. And to the show's credit, I thought, he was just holding her hand really tightly or something.
Mm-hmm.
But when it pulls out, he's holding onto the check that he's about to pay for the therapy, which is kind of funny, but still.
It's kind of funny, but I also immediately felt like, oh, there's no way this type of gag is going to hold up for several seasons of a show unless they find a much more clever way of writing these bits, like a different energy to this, so it doesn't have that shtick to it.
Were they still doing them in season 2 when you accidentally watched the episode?
Yeah. Oh yeah, they definitely were. They were.
Yeah.
I mean, should we talk about the fact that basically the character of Susan is recycled Diane Chambers.
Well, we have to.
Yeah.
Immediately, there's a real Sam and Diane dynamic that they're presenting.
There's a Sam. I wouldn't necessarily say she's a recite. She's a very different character from Diane.
I don't know.
You know what? She's a different...
Her energy is very similar.
She's a different
Well, she has
character.
Shelley Long energy.
Yeah.
She's a different character, but that character, much like Diane, has this thing... The way I described it in my notes is like fluctuating between flustered and earnest. It's like a sine wave that's constantly just wavering between flustered by the situation, and then she has like some earnest advice. Really flustered, really embarrassed, earnest advice. And it's hard for me to like criticize her for that because I have to assume in the way that sitcoms were made at the time that this show was developed, like you said, it started right like a minute after Cheers ended. And I can't imagine that was not like a deliberate choice from the creators or producers of this show that like they're bringing her in and they want her to do that thing she did on Cheers.
They want her to do the thing. They absolutely want her to do the thing. Yeah.
Well, like they made a point in the first episode that we watched when she's frantically trying to cover the desk for them for the office. Like it opens, you know, she's like answering the phones because they're awaiting the arrival. Like it's right before the argument about they need a receptionist. She's the one trying to cover the phones and she's not very good at it. And someone said to her, well, you know, didn't you go to secretary school? And she's like, no, I didn't. I couldn't get in. So I got a PhD instead. And that is like very much from the Diane Chambers like playbook because it's like, you know, her character in Cheers is an intellectual, and at first she's not a good waitress. Like she can't do it's like the same thing. She can't do the practical things, but she can, you know, like use her brain and is like a little bit oblivious sometimes and is like
smart,
cerebral,
but not street smart. Yeah. I do want to drop...
it's the same shtick that way. That's all I meant by recycled Diane Chambers.
I do want to drop a little compliment that I have from the very beginning of the show, like my first reaction when the show started. Because the opening titles, it just jumps right into it. It's like the title of the show, tiny little musical jingle, and it's right into it. There's no like big silly montage. There's no opening credits. It just dives right in, which at that time was pretty rare. You know what other show that came hot on the heels of Cheers that does that exact same thing? Frasier.
Yes,
and Frasier jumps right into it with that.
Or Seinfeld.
Seinfeld too, but what's fascinating is Frasier began 5 months after this show.
Wow.
And it's also about a therapist, and it's also pulling from Cheers, although it's a direct spin-off. But it almost feels like the way that Frasier just has like the quick musical jingle, the one title, and boom, you're into it.
Toss salads and scrambled eggs.
Did they take that from this show?
Maybe, I don't know.
Good
I mean,
advice
you know,
did it first.
Yeah.
Frasier is definitely a much more polished version of this show.
Oh, yeah, big time. I have to say, so, yeah, for the listeners out there, I screwed up and accidentally watched an episode from season 2. And it's funny, like I also watched the ones that were required. I went back and watched the 2 season 1 episodes, but I got through a complete episode of season 2 and the opening titles are the same. It's still the quick cut to that, but the font choices are the most 90s thing I have ever seen. It's like a two-toned, like 2-color font, like good, and then advice, and then there's like a line in the middle. Like it is like maximum 90s. It's very good. So if you guys have a chance, I would recommend watching this particular episode because it's kind of fun. It's like season 2, episode 3.
It's so one of the things on this show that I'm picking up, especially if we're getting into Frasier a bit. Frasier has, you know, when it opens, it has a little bit of, okay, this show, the dynamic is mostly going to be Frasier coming up against his dad, right? But it has so much more in it that they already know that they don't have to rely on that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this show, right off the bat, I was like, you cannot center a show. You cannot start a show centered around a will they, won't they? Because where does the show go?
Yeah.
You have to, you got to build that, but you can't build it into the premise.
Right.
Like, it just right off the bat, you're like, well, this is going to get pretty old pretty quick because, either they're going to get together or they won't. And you're like, even at this point, especially like Shelley Long coming off of, Cheers, having gone through a will they, won't they for years. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
100%
Because
agree.
people like it.
They do.
It is a classic
do.
trope. It is a classic trope, like Ross and Rachel, like Sam and Diane. Like it is like a classic thing.
Except they're not. If you're describing the show, you don't need to describe the will they, won't they on those shows.
Exactly. No, that's literally what I was about to say. Is like Cheers is not all about Sam and Diane.
Yeah.
It's not, and then Friends is not all about Ross and Rachel. That's just like one of the many things going on.
It's one card in the playbook, but it's not the explicit premise.
Yeah.
Although I will say, like, overall, generally, I don't love will they or won't they's in sitcoms, to be perfectly honest. And, even when they're done well, because to me, it always inevitably eventually leads to a very soap opera type of energy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that will they or won't they's are good in dramas. I like them when they're done in a grounded, dramatic way, and I don't have an example for you right off the bat. But there is something that I find satisfying about that, like romantic tension when it finally happens. But in a sitcom, I always find them a little bit exhausting.
I'm saying in a sitcom, really. And
I mean, I'm a sucker for them. When they're good, they're good, and they can really revitalize the show's energy. I mean, Ross and Rachel are a perfect example of terrible. Nobody like that's not an enjoyable dynamic.
No.
And I would argue that most Friends fans probably, it leads to some fun with the concept over the years for sure. Yeah. But you've got Jim and Pam. That's a good will they, won't they?
Yeah.
You've got I don't even know. Barney and Robin on How I Met Your Mother. That's a good will they, won't they?
See, I was about to ask you if you had examples of good ones because I couldn't think of a good one.
Well, the thing with like The Office and Jim and Pam, they got together pretty quickly. And so they had to like throw in other will they or won't they.
They did. Well, that's all. I mean, Jim and Pam don't get together until the beginning of season 4.
Right, so, I guess.
And then the show has a hard time maintaining the dramatic stakes that it had before. So that's why they start introducing that.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to say The Office. Yeah, I like the Jim and Pam thing in The Office. If I had to pick a sitcom where there's romantic tension that I actually like, that would be my top choice and maybe my only choice. But there's also the Dwight and Angela one in that show.
On The Office,
which I actually personally find quite funny. But like,
he killed her cat.
I know that
I know, but that
it was a mercy killing. To be fair,
it
was a euthanization.
But
he murdered a cat.
But the thing,
and then the show went on for another 5 years.
But the thing about that show is the way they do the will they or won't they's in that show feel somehow different from the way that other sitcoms do it. And I can't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it's just the fact that it's shot like this sort of documentary style.
So being the sitcom nerd that I am, like I feel like it's important to reiterate that will they, won't they will work or they won't, as long as the show won't collapse if they don't. Friends has a bit of this problem because honestly, in the won't they bits of Friends, it gets kind of awkward and like ugly briefly.
Yes.
Like there are moments where you're like, these are not fun things to see. Like it's not fun to see Ross cheat on Rachel and then try to talk himself out of it. Like these aren't fun to watch, right?
You're very right. I've never heard it pointed out in that way before, but it's true. It's like at the end of the day, it's a sitcom and every bit that you put in, every plot line needs to meet a test of, is it funny? Do I want to spend time with these characters doing this thing?
Yeah.
Because in the sitcoms that work, you ultimately just enjoy spending hours and hours and hours of your life hanging out with these characters. And Friends does suffer from some periods of time where you're like, I don't want to be around these people. I don't know why they're still around each other. Like at some point you're like, why are they still hanging out together?
Yeah.
I have, like two great examples being like, say, and these are both Michael Schur shows, so it's like cheating a little, but like in The Good Place, Eleanor and Chidi are a great will they, won't they? If for whatever reason the chemistry between them wasn't working in a romantic way, the show could still survive without the relationship. Parks and Recreation has several will they, won't they's, and almost all of them work. You got April and Andy.
That's true.
That's true.
You've got Leslie and Ben, and all of them work because of the chemistry between the actors. But if for whatever reason it wasn't working out, the show could quickly pivot and recover. This show, if it does go on, back to Good Advice, this show would collapse if the characters could not be around each other.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And part of it is probably because when it comes to a will they or won't they, yes, you're kind of toying with the audience in that back and forth. But ultimately, inevitably, the answer to the question is they will. They will work. Because if they don't work out as a couple, that's not fun. And so 9 times out of 10, one day, it's going to lead to them at least temporarily getting together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When they get together, it's always the writer's job to then find a way to get them apart. So it's like they've got to come up with like a fun complication that's like okay with the sitcom where their relationship is in trouble and they break up because of some outside thing or for some miscommunication, and then they never truly get over each other because there's always strong feelings and sexual tension there. So inevitably they'll get pulled back together. So there's like, the will there or won't they can work if they get together once, as long as the chemistry continues.
And I think you see it in modern sitcoms. What they're ditching is the let's break them up afterwards part. Yeah. Because they realize the show is about more than that, right? There was a really interesting interview that came out recently where John Krasinski was talking about his time on The Office. And he apparently just full on stepped in, and they had written a scene where he cheated on Pam in one of the later seasons.
Oh my God.
And he said, I won't shoot that.
Wow.
And because they were like, oh, we got to get some drama in this. We got to get some drama in this. And he was just like, no, the fans will not stick around for that.
Yeah.
Good for him for putting his foot down on that.
Yeah.
Because it's true. If I saw that, I would be
Jim.
like, and I'm out.
Yeah. Like it's one of those things where they did play with that a little bit in the later, like the very last season of The Office. They did play with that where they were going through marriage tensions, like a lot of people do. Like they were going through like a serious rough patch where they were kind of at a point where they're like, okay, we need to like figure this out. Like we need to like, come back together. And then happily they did. And I think like if they didn't come back together, fans would have revolted. Like fans would have like not been okay with that. Like it would have been upsetting. But they chose like ultimately, and probably because of John Krasinski and maybe Jenna Fisher as well, like they chose to get them, for it to be a thing that most couples go through, where there is like marriage is difficult. They have like a rough patch and they get through it, and then they realize that they love each other. And that's like what a lot of couples go through. Like they don't necessarily all cheat on each other and get a divorce,
Exactly. Marital problems and issues with career stuff. These are life events that almost definitely
anyone can relate to.
Yeah. But TV has normalized cheating to the point where it's just like such a plot point.
Yes.
Like where you're just like, well, everybody does it. No, they don't.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
It feels like what we're kind of driving at is in The Office. The will they or won't theys, and especially the Jim and Pam one, is not the premise of the show, but it's a layer that adds some heart to the show. And if the audience is wondering why we're belaboring this concept so much in talking about Good Advice, it's because Good Advice makes it pretty clear from minute one this show hinges entirely on the romantic tension between these two characters. And if it doesn't work, the show fails. And it feels like every episode, although we only watched 2 episodes, it feels like...
I watched 3.
You watched 3. It feels like...
I watched 3 as well.
It definitely feels like every episode is going to spend at least half of its plot points on dramatic romantic tension between these two characters. You just know that's where it's going.
Yeah. And I mean, even the poster for the show is like the two of them in a classic 90s stance where it's like, get a load of this guy.
Yeah.
And like, it's like them. I don't know if it's them back to back, but it might as well be,
But on that note, I also want to point out that there's a promo poster I saw for what is obviously season 2 of the show.
Yeah.
Where, we know that Estelle Harris is gone. And it turns out that Shelley Long's character, can't even remember her. Susan. Her sister, joins the show as, I guess, becomes the receptionist.
Yeah,
but
played by Terry Garr.
Terry Garr. Based on this poster, it seems like they are trying to do some sort of Three's Company style, will they or won't they, where he might be making a play for both of them, and they might be competing with each other as sisters for his affection or some bullshit like that.
Yeah. Very, very silly. And it's definitely a shame. Like, Terry Garr is a very talented, has a lot of charisma. I like her a lot. This is not in any way a judgment of her. It's just that it lost when I watched that second episode. Or that third episode. It definitely lost the magic when Estelle was gone. Like, it's like, oh, we have like another like blonde lady in her 40s. Like, she's a different character. Like, she is definitely kind of a foil to her sister, but they get along. Like, they get along really well. And they kind of gang up to make fun of Jack. Like, they both kind of tag team making fun of him together, but they're very different personalities. Like, the sister character is very kind of like her whole shtick as a receptionist is she's not a good receptionist, but she doesn't care. She just spends the whole time filing her nails, basically. And, she's always like kind of, blah about everything and is just kind of there to give like a quippy retort to everything. So I don't know. It's, it's not the best dynamic. And it seems like in the second season, they like obviously had to like retool it a little bit. And it kind of lost a bit of its like fun edge because, it's just, and then I like Artie a lot and Artie doesn't seem to be in it as often.
I did look, he does make it the whole show. So maybe he just had an off episode or something. Yeah. But I mean, Estelle Harris, for those out there who aren't obsessive about Seinfeld, Estelle Harris plays George's mother on Seinfeld. And, she is such a unique treasure that anything that has her in it is going to immediately be better than something that doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, I couldn't resist a little bit of a timeline research on this. And, I want to propose a little small theory here. This is a little bit of a muddling through type of scenario. So, I checked on the dates, and Good Advice began April 2nd, 1993. The first time that Estelle Harris appears in Seinfeld, the first time we meet George's parents, is season 4, episode 22, May 13th, 1993, about a month later. And so obviously, like, if you're a Seinfeld fan, or even if you've just like kind of know about Seinfeld, you know that George's parents are, of all of the secondary characters on that show, arguably the funniest, or at least among the most important to the dynamic of that show. They are wonderful. But it's amazing that it's at the end of season 4. Like, this is the second last episode of season 4 when we finally meet George's parents. So there's something like 61 episodes that they do before we ever meet his parents. But as soon as we do, they clearly become an immediate fixture. And looking at this timeline, basically She debuts in the second last episode of season 4 of Seinfeld.
Yeah.
A few months later, they start season 5. And in the second episode of season 5, we are back in with George's parents. And that's around the same time when they had to retool this show sans Estelle Harris. So it feels a little bit like they brought George's parents into an episode. They saw how fucking incredible it was. And they were just like, I don't care what other show she's on. Whatever they're paying her, I will quadruple it because she's ours now. I don't know that happened. That's just the fun theory that I want to propose.
More likely, just going through the dates of it, is this show, it did 6 episodes, April and May of 93. It did not really do very well.
Yeah.
They did not pick it up for a second season. And then, so everybody's contracts probably would have expired. Season 5 of Seinfeld has an extended plot for Estelle Harris because that's the season where George moves back in with his parents.
Exactly.
So they're going to be around a lot. So she basically, she gets a regular gig.
Yeah.
Then, mid-season comes along and they're like, well, we got this show from last year. It did okay. Shelley Long, why don't we throw a second season at it? Because that show doesn't come back until May of 94.
Weird.
It did a full
okay.
year. It had a full year off. It was a mid-season replacement both times. So yeah, she just was not. She definitely wasn't available because her contract expired, and they were like, yeah, all right.
All right.
That was a show.
We'll be right back after these messages. After these messages, we'll be right back. Hello, wonderful listeners and fans of this podcast. We want to hear from you. Go to anchor.fm/thatwasashow and leave us a voice message, and we might play it in a future episode. Or email us at thatwasashow@aol.com, our 90s era email address, and we might read your message. Our lines are open, so call right now. Part 2 of my cockamamie theory, which is maybe the more realistic part, is that when it did come time to cast the role of George's mom, it's possible that like a producer or casting director or writer on Seinfeld saw this, because in addition to the fact that she is wonderful in this show from like the first line of dialogue that she has, and you kind of get the feeling like if she can steal these scenes, what's she going to do in Seinfeld? But also, we learned from just the 2 episodes that we saw, in the first time we see her, she's making fun of her bald son.
Yeah, she bald shames him.
She bald shames him. And the second time that we see her in the other episode, she's going to a Mahjong tournament. And the first episode that she appears in Seinfeld, she's playing Mahjong. So I can't help but think that they kind of brought her in thinking like, she's hilarious, and
we
need
this woman. Yeah.
She comes into the scene, it's the first scene of episode 2 of this show, and she bulldozes through it.
Yes.
Like
she has the best lines of dialogue.
Yeah.
She's like a tiny little woman, but she's like a force of nature. Like you can't take your eyes off of her.
Yeah.
No, you really can't.
Captivating.
For those in the audience out there, I'm sure you've noticed this happens. So I'm not, I'm not going to give a final verdict on it, but it's safe to say, good advice, it's pretty meh. And you know how you can tell when you're listening to this is if we go on long tangents talking about every other show on the planet except for the show we're talking about. That's what's going on here.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'm more of a Rebecca man myself. So I was actually pleasantly surprised by Shelley Long in this because, like I said, I'm a Rebecca man. So, seeing her in this, I was like, oh, she is very funny on this. She gets to be very, very silly, and she gets some great line deliveries. But, otherwise, like you see like why the show didn't last because you're just like, it's fine.
Yeah. There's nothing about it that is special, really.
Beyond the cast being all
a stacked
talented
cast.
Yeah.
Like this is the thing, right? It should have been successful. It is a stacked cast. It has kind of a fun premise. If you like leave out the will they or won't they. It is kind of a fun premise, right? But there's just something that falls flat in it. And yeah, I don't know. It's just lacking that extra oomph.
It's actually like the first episode we watched, which I guess we now realize isn't technically the pilot, but it does sort of introduce the characters well. And compared to the last few shows that we've reviewed, it's actually pretty good. It has some potential. I'm watching it and thinking like, yeah, especially at that time and compared to the shows that were being made, I'm like, I would have watched this. This is good. This is fine. But you're right. There's nothing special. There's nothing like hugely memorable. But for what it's trying to do, it's like pretty well written. It's well edited. It's got the pacing, I will say, like if there was one compliment I was going to give to this show, the pacing flows very, very smoothly.
Yeah.
Great use of setting. Great use of setting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the one thing that really jumped out to me is it seems like a show that's all about divorce. Like the word divorce is said thousands and thousands of times. It's almost like someone in the writer's room or the network or wherever picked up on recently published statistics about how many American couples divorce.
Or we're going through one.
Yes. And it's like, they're like, oh, we just need to make a show that talks about divorce a lot because it comes up again and again and again. And in the show the episode that I accidentally watched, that's a big plot line because Jack's parents come to visit and Jack's parents announce to him that they're getting a divorce. And he desperately tries to get Susan to try to get his parents to like amend their relationship, and his dad's a real wacky guy. And the thing that I found very funny about it and is that Jack, and this is the first reference to it, I don't think they even mention it in the other episodes that we watched, he is he's North American of Irish descent, which I am as well, so I can relate to. And his parents like lay that on so thick. And the entire episode is about how they're Irish and about how they don't talk about their feelings and everyone just thinks they're alcoholics. And meanwhile, his dad busts out like a mini bar from his like suitcase. And like they lay on the like cliches like very, very thick. And it gets to a point where I'm like, oh God, like it's so silly. But there were more subtle things said in that episode that I thought were actually very on point and relatable for anyone of that background. But they, of course, had to like make him wear a like little sweater that said Ireland and had a shamrock on it. And it was like very like over the top. It was almost like someone gave network notes where it was like, oh, we need more Irish stuff. Like, you know, we just need more, where it's like it would have been enough for them to not be able to hug, you know, like the two men. And so I don't know. It was a weird episode, but it definitely felt like, you know, a lot of it was around divorce. A lot of it was like around like how many like stereotypes can we throw in here? How many, like it was just kind of like they almost had a tally of how many times they had to like mention a certain thing.
Yeah.
How many times do they need to mention divorce? How many times do they need to throw like an Irish American like cliche in there? And then, you know, there's like a whole interplay between him and Artie where the dad says some offensive things to Artie and he's like, oh, you know, like about like Artie being Jewish, and it's like very cringy and like it's resolved, and then he apologizes to him, but it's like, you know, it's all like, okay, let's just like talk about all the tropes and all the stereotypes of Irish and Jewish people.
Yeah, and I caught that scene when you were watching that episode, and I, you know, not to have to go looping back to Frasier, but Frasier actually had an episode where they did a very funny like contrast between Frasier and his family and some Jewish characters that found a way to like bring out some humor in some of these tropes without laying on thick cliches.
Yeah.
And the whole joke was that like Frasier and his dad and his brother, being, I guess, kind of like waspy characters, they are more reserved with their emotions. And I think it was like a woman that Frasier was dating maybe, but it was like her and her mother, and they're Jewish, and they're like about to get to blows. Like they're in this argument, and it's making like Frasier and his family so uncomfortable to like watch them be very like open and spilling all of their emotions and arguing. But then they resolve everything, and then it's like completely fine.
Yeah.
And they're watching the way that like this family has almost like a therapeutic venting session, like in real time. And it's showing this contrast between their characters, but without like talking about it. They show it in something that's just like a plot point, and they just kind of show it as like subtext instead of let's just do, it's like what you were saying before, Barry, like it would be, this show would do the version of like a priest, a rabbi, and a whatever in a canoe sort of
it's all
thing.
It's all telling instead of showing. Whereas like the clever way to do it all would be like, oh, like, you know, they can't talk about their feelings. Everything's bottled up until they have one too many whiskeys and something actually traumatic happens, and then it triggers the big emotional response. Like that is authentic to people with like an Irish, especially Irish Catholic background, where it's like no one talks about the bad things that happen until there's like a funeral, and then people get into the whiskey, and then the floodgates open, and then it happens.
But just show it or just do it. Don't like narrate it. Don't like lead into it with like 1,000 cliches.
Yeah,
just do
it's
the
so
scene.
funny. So it was funny for us as me, an Irish person married to a Jewish guy. We had a funny, like, you know, we were like, what is happening here?
Should we talk about the other episode we watched?
I mean, I barely remember what happens.
So episode 4 was the other one we watched. It was called The Kiss.
Yes. Okay.
And this
we
was
should talk about it.
This in this episode, it was kind of it was Susan's first night on her own since the divorce, because, you know, she's been with her husband every day since they met. And since they divorced, she's been with her son, who I didn't know she had until this episode.
Right, same, yeah.
And he's actually pretty funny.
Yeah.
He's pretty funny. So her son's going off to, you know, stay with the father for the first night, and Susan, she's completely, you know, she's a little, you know, anxious about being alone for the first time, so she tries to make herself busy around the office at night, and she kind of gets involved with all the people, you know, around her in the office. You know, she's helping people parallel park, and she's, you know, kind of harassing the office's cleaning woman, and you know, Jack, of course, has 2 dates, you know, planned for the night, and, you know, she manages to ruin one of them by talking, you know, to her. And then, of course, you know, the whole episode sort of tail ends with, you know, Jack and Susan, you know, her explaining what's going on, and him, you know, offering to have her sleep at his apartment, but also clearly coming on to her. And then they, you know, they play checkers all night and then sleep together on the couch. And then, of course, they do kiss in the morning. And that's why they call it The Kiss, which is kind of like, I feel like if you were like somehow a fan of this show, wouldn't you be like, oh, they're already calling it The Kiss in episode 4? Like we're skipping through this thing pretty well by episode 4.
Yeah, it's a little quick to jump to that level.
Right.
If you're trying to make a meal out of their romantic tension, this is a little soon.
Right, but it is just one kiss.
It is.
But she collapses on the floor after from the tidal wave of romantic energy.
Like a Southern belle.
Yeah, it's funny. And to clarify what Barry said, like they sleep together in the office. They literally sleep. They don't have sex.
Yeah. So it's interesting in that, like, it like really skips along to the next, because, you know, yes, it's just a kiss, but, you know, shows would go 2 seasons of this shit without getting a kiss in there, you know?
Yeah. All right.
That's all I have to say about that.
The errand boy character.
Oh, yeah.
Boy.
I do want to...
He's just like, what's his name in the last episode? What was that character's name on Everything's Relative?
Which one?
The first Everything's Relative.
Yes, the eccentric errand boy.
Well, the one in Everything's Relative, the one who seems like a clinger on to Fonzie or something.
Yeah.
That
was
guy.
a different
Yeah.
type of one. This guy's like, how would you even define this character? He's like someone who is just sort of like going with the flow sort of thing of whatever's happening in this building. Like he seems like
I think he's a stoner, but they don't say he's a stoner.
They don't say
no,
it.
I think he's just generic weird.
Right, maybe.
I
like-
I don't think the show has enough respect for him to make
Yeah.
him a stoner.
I'm going to say right now that this is definitely a trope. The eccentric errand boy. You know, like there's like it comes in different forms, but it's definitely a thing in these sitcoms.
Yeah.
Because they use him in the way that a sitcom would use a wacky neighbor, but he's not a wacky neighbor. It is not that trope. This is a different kind of character.
Yeah.
But it fills that sort of
Yes. It
pocket.
transposes the wacky neighbor to the workplace sitcom. So
Yeah, he's the Dwight. He's the Dwight. You know, he's the
Yeah.
Dwight or the what's the character's name on the original? Is it
the UK office? I don't remember the character either.
Garth? Maybe
I don't know. But what I mean is he has a very menial job. Dwight has more authority in the office. It's like a menial job. It's like a very entry level job at whatever company, whatever workplace. It's like a very menial job. And they're always just a weirdo or
I
like
think I would
a
just-
lackey.
I think I would just call it the workplace weirdo. Really.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's like Andy Dick on news radio.
That's what I was thinking.
And there's-
Andy Dick or Joe Rogan.
Yeah. What's the one? It's that show, Suddenly Susan. There's like a guy who's the same thing as well.
Yeah.
These are the characters that do not get their own plot lines or their own life outside of these scenes.
Yeah.
They just dip in to like add a little bit of comic relief and then vamoose.
Yeah.
Gunther. Gunther's a good example.
Even though poor Gunther was like actually like the boss of the coffee shop.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, technically, Rachel would have been the workplace weirdo at that place.
Yeah.
Brynn, how does this show connect with Friends?
Yeah, it connects very closely, actually. Good Advice is connected with Friends by 1 degree in 2 separate scenarios. So the first one is through Terry Garr. So Terry Garr, who plays Paige Turner on season 2 of Good Advice, had a recurring role on Friends as Phoebe Abbott, who is Phoebe Buffay's biological mother. So she's in a few episodes. She's in like 4 or 5 episodes. So it's that whole plot line of when they go to the beach and Phoebe seeks her out and thinks that she's just a close friend of her biological mother. And there's all these like, revelations about her mother, like who she thought her mother was growing up. And it turns out that this woman is actually her biological mother. And the woman that raised her until she died was just like her adoptive mother. So Terry Garr, like 1 degree. And then we also have Henriette Mantel, who played Henriette Campbell on Good Advice. She also guest starred on Friends and played a nurse on the episode called The One Where Rachel Has a Baby.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not bad.
Yeah.
And I suppose we should do the spin-off.
Yeah, we should, I guess. The shortest answer is that basically everyone on Good Advice was already a TV superstar. They were already established in the industry. And they all continued to have really long careers after this show. Even though this show was not successful, they all kept working. So what I'm going to do is just kind of read some of the give a little bit of trivia on what some of these people did after that I found notable. So, of course, first of all, we have Shelley Long. After Good Advice, she had another short-lived sitcom called Kelly Kelly, and she also guest starred on Frasier several times playing Diane Chambers, her iconic Cheers character. My favorite role of Shelley Long's was actually her turn as Carol Brady in the 90s Brady Bunch spoofs. So she was in all 3 Brady Bunch movies. as Carol Brady. And I just thought her energy was like perfect for that. Like her kind of big way of like performing like worked like perfectly in that kind of parody. Actually, another fun thing about the Brady Bunch movies is that Henriette Mantel, that I just mentioned, played Alice in those movies. So they were on Good Advice together, and then they did this Brady Bunch movie together. So it's kind of funny. She also was memorable on Modern Family as Dee Dee Pritchett, the ex-wife of Ed O'Neill's character Jay Pritchett, and Claire and Mitchell's mother.
Oh.
So Treat Williams, who we've already mentioned quite a bit, he is a treat. He is like someone who kind of, I don't know, he's kind of like one of these guys who he's like sort of like a TV dad. Like he doesn't always play a dad, but he just has a dad energy, I think. He basically became the king of procedural dramas after his stint on Good Advice. Like he didn't really return to the sitcom at all, as we already mentioned. He's played a cop, a doctor, a lawyer, all of these things on several procedural dramas. A lot of geriatric millennials like ourselves would also recognize him as Dr. Andy Brown, the patriarch on the WB drama Everwood.
Barry and I just shook our heads on geriatric millennials.
That's what they call us. Old millennials.
I don't. I mean, I'm a huge like detractor of, I hate all these like labels, and that one has been thrown out there so much lately. I'm so mad at it.
I love it, actually. Whatevs. It's fine. I won't say it around you anymore, Barry.
Please don't.
Okay. And then our girl Estelle Harris, as we mentioned, continued to play Estelle Costanza to perfection, and also did a ton of voice acting. You know, she ruled, voice acting, and was
she's Mrs. Potato Head.
Exactly. And then we also have Christopher McDonald, who actually didn't appear in any of the episodes that we watched of Good Advice. But
he's the husband.
Yes, he plays the husband. Yeah, he plays
Yep.
the ex-husband, Susan's ex-husband, that is mentioned a lot. And it's pretty much perfect casting because he has made a career out of playing sort of pompous jerks. From Scooter McGavin on Happy Gilmore.
It's that guy?
Yeah.
It's Shooter McGavin.
Oh, Shooter McGavin. Sorry. Shooter McGavin. Who, like, and he gives that iconic line in Happy Gilmore. He's like, I eat pieces of shit like you for breakfast.
You eat pieces of shit for breakfast?
That's like a little dialogue that my dad and I say to each other all the time.
He's so funny in that movie.
He is very funny.
So funny.
He's like, and I feel like they haven't let him be hilarious in that many things over the years as much as he deserves. And most recently, he has been on the show Hacks, which Aaron and I really like. He plays the role of Marty.
Oh, yeah.
The sort of hotel tycoon.
Yeah, he's great in that role.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to highlight Ross Malinger, who plays Susan's son, Michael. So as soon as we started watching Good Advice, I recognized him immediately because he was basically a little it boy back in the 90s. Like, he was the adorable little brunette boy with a bowl cut that was in so many movies and TV shows. He was in Kindergarten Cop. He was in Roseanne. He was in an episode of Davis Rules. He was also in Sleepless in Seattle, playing Tom Hanks' son. And he played Adam Littman on the Serenity Now episode of Seinfeld.
Oh.
Yeah. And this one is the most fun role. What I found in his like kind of iconic list of roles on IMDb is he is the voice of TJ Detweiler on Recess.
I have never seen a single episode of Recess.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Oh my God. Okay, well, that was a very disappointing response. Okay, everyone out there listening is probably screaming at you both right now because Recess was such a huge phenomenon for our age group. I won't use the expression that I used earlier to refer to us, but...
Oh, geriatric millennials?
Yes, people in our mid to late 30s. Come on, Recess was the shit. And basically, TJ Detweiler was like the main kid on Recess. He was like the leader of the pack.
Oh, he's the one with the backwards hat?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes.
Well, he did have a leader of the pack jean jacket energy in this show.
He He did. He was very precocious in this show.
Yeah.
That was his whole deal in the 90s. He played the cute, precocious kid.
One of the characters' name was Spinelli, right?
Ashley Spinelli, yeah.
I knew that.
Yeah.
Should we check in with Mr. Producer and see if he knows anything about good advice?
Oh, this guy never knows anything about any of these shows. Hello.
Hey, Mr. Producer, how's it going?
Couldn't be better, my boy. Couldn't be better. What's on the little program today?
Well, we're talking about good advice.
Oh, good advice. Sure. The Shelley Long vehicle.
That's the one. Now, I don't suppose you know anything about this one?
Of course I do. You know, that Shelley Long, she was a hot commodity. She was coming off that hit show Cheers. You know, I never managed to see it while it was on the air, but I understand it was quite popular.
It was very popular, yes.
So everybody, they were gunning for this girl. Hell, the whole cast on that show was taking meetings all over town. But it was this project, Good Advice. It was created by Danny Jacobson and Norma Safford Villa that won the war. Long, she was all in. They ordered a pilot, and a search began for a capable male co-star who would go toe-to-toe with her in the comedy department. So, enter Treat Williams. Now, this guy, he just oozed charm, and I tell you, the show was seemingly a sure thing.
Right, sure.
So, what else did you want to know?
Well,
Is something the matter?
no, it's just, usually, you take us on a pretty long walk to get to the topic at hand, and then you usually just ramble off a couple of names and...
And what?
Well, I just got so used to you, meandering a bit that I didn't actually write down any questions this time.
I see.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could make some up.
Well, I mean, hey, don't force it, kid. I mean, if you don't got it, you don't got it.
Right.
So, catch you next time?
Catch you next time. I've got a couple of leftovers. I don't know if either of you guys do, but the first one is they really loved elevators opening onto a set back then, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that too.
Yeah.
What was the show? Oh, it was Rachel Gunn RN, where we were talking a long
Lots
time.
of elevator
about
gags.
That.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean, definitely in Good Advice, the elevator opening to reveal Estelle Harris was magic. Like, it was like a great moment.
Yes. 100%.
No other way to do that.
True. If you're gonna have an elevator open onto your set, that's what I want to see behind those doors.
Yeah.
Also, I have to say, I did kind of find this one line pretty funny at the beginning where I guess this is the way they were establishing that she's not a very good receptionist. This was before Estelle Harris comes in and Shelley Long is kind of trying to make do as the receptionist for the shared office. And they're trying to establish both that she's not good at that and that Treat Williams' character is like kind of a bit of a dickbag in some ways. So they did it pretty well with this joke where she fails to properly take a message that's basically just like a horse racing tip for him because he bets on horses. And then when she tries to relay this to him, she doesn't know if it's like the second horse in the 8th round or the 8th horse in the 2nd round or something. And she asks him, "Do you have a gambling problem?" And he says, "Well, I do now."
I like that too. He has a few lines like that just really shut down just really land a laugh. There's one he talks where she's like talking about like about him ending marriages and stuff like that, and she's like, "Well, what happens if you talk somebody who's in a good marriage into divorcing?" And he just goes, "Oops."
Yeah. He landed some good jokes. And my one last leftover is, kind of just looping back to her not being a good therapist whatsoever, which also is evident in the way she just point blank asks if he has a gambling problem just because he's going to like bet on a horse once, is that there's one of these brief throwaway gag scenes where she's with one of her patients. And there's a whole suicidal patient joke thing that is so irresponsible that I almost feel like the
It was
show
very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the show needs a trigger warning before even having that scene.
Yeah.
That's how irresponsible it is. I don't want to even talk about it in more detail, just
Because
to say
it's bad, yeah.
it's bad. We don't need to talk about it, but she's a shit therapist, and it would have been better if instead of having scenes like that, they found funny ways of showing that she's like not a great therapist, and there could have been like something to do in a sitcom about that. But
I have a leftover on that, which is essentially every single bit of marketing about this is she's a marriage counselor, she's a marriage counselor, she's a marriage counselor. She's definitely not. She's such a wide-ranging therapist covering every single element that clearly, like, she is in the pilot, but by the second episode, she is not.
Here's how much she's not. Out of all of these gags of seeing her with other patients, not a single one of them was a couple.
No, the only married people she ends up talking to are his clients going through divorces.
Yeah. I did see one couple on the episode that I watched.
Ah, there you go.
And, okay, one leftover that I have is they make a lot of fuss talking about her book, but we never see, at least in the episodes we watched, we don't see the book. You would think someone like her who likes to talk about her book so much would have it like on display or something.
It's
like in her office, you know?
Yeah,
like on a shelf, like
a poster. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh,
on the shelf,
100%.
on the shelf, you know.
She's like, I wrote a book. Like, you hear her say, I wrote a book like 1,000 times.
Yeah, it would have been in a framed poster next to the door to her office so that everyone coming in sees, oh, she's that therapist that I saw on TV doing the talk show circuit.
Yeah.
The book does make for a very funny reoccurring gag, and it comes up, you know, in the 3 episodes I saw, it probably comes up 2 out of 3 episodes. And anytime everybody's like, oh, you're the one who wrote that book. And she's like, yes, I am. And the person always says something along the lines of, it didn't work. They clearly, like, it's clearly a bad book.
I mean,
and like,
yeah. And
everybody who reads it gets divorced.
There's another recurring thing where there's like a thing of gossip about her that goes around about how her marriage ended. And it's always the fact that she caught her husband cheating by finding the mistress in the closet, in the bedroom closet. So that comes up a lot too. So there's, you know.
And all that's in the pilot.
It's all in the pilot, but obviously it wasn't that entertaining because we would have brought it up in the main section of the episode.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. Well, good night, everyone.
That Was a Show is created and hosted by Brynn Byrne, Andrew Barry Helmer, and myself, Aaron Yeger. It's a production of Radio Gizmo in Toronto, Canada. Subscribe, rate, review, and share. Follow us on Instagram and tell your friends about it. That Was a Show?
Radio Gizmo.